The story of Jim Carrey is often seen as one of the most inspiring journeys in the world of entertainment, but it is also a story filled with struggle, pressure, and moments that many people do not fully understand. Today, millions of people remember him as a comedy legend, a man who could make entire audiences laugh with just a single expression. His energy, his face, and the way he moved his body on screen made him different from almost every other comedian of his time. However, behind that bright and funny image, there has always been a deeper and more complicated story. This becomes even more interesting when we bring in the experience of Dave Chappelle, a comedian who once looked up to Jim Carrey and later had a surprising experience when he finally met him. Many people believe that meeting your hero is a dream come true, but sometimes that moment can feel very different from what you expect. In this case, it opened a new way of thinking about fame, personality, and the gap between public image and real life. To truly understand why this moment mattered, we must first go back to the early life of Jim Carrey, long before he became famous. His story does not begin in Hollywood or on a big stage. Instead, it begins in a simple working-class family in Canada, where life was not always easy. His father worked hard to support the family, while his mother stayed at home, trying to keep things together. At first, their life may have looked normal from the outside, but slowly, things started to fall apart. Financial problems became serious, and the family lost their home. For many people, this would already be a difficult situation, but for a young child, it can feel even more overwhelming. Jim Carrey and his family had to live in a small van for a period of time, and at one point, they even stayed in a tent. These experiences were not just small challenges. They shaped how he saw the world and how he understood life. During these hard times, Jim found a way to escape reality through humor. He would stand in front of a mirror and make funny faces, experimenting with expressions and movements. This may have looked like simple play, but it was actually the beginning of something much bigger. It was his way of dealing with stress and finding joy when everything around him felt uncertain. Even though life was difficult, he did not give up on his dreams. As he grew older, he began to think more seriously about becoming a comedian. However, chasing a dream is never easy, especially when you come from a background where survival is the main focus. He worked as a janitor to help support his family, balancing long hours of work with his desire to perform. This period of his life showed his determination and strength.
He was not just chasing fame.
He was trying to build a better future for himself and his family. These early struggles played a huge role in shaping the person he would later become. They gave him a deep understanding of both pain and humor, and this combination became the foundation of his unique style. Years later, when people saw him on screen making them laugh, they often did not realize how much effort and hardship stood behind those moments. And this is where the story begins to take shape, showing us that success is often built on experiences that are not always visible to the public. As Jim Carrey grew older, his interest in comedy slowly turned into a serious goal, but the road ahead was far from easy. Like many young performers, he had to face fear, doubt, and rejection before he could find his place. His first experience on stage as a teenager did not go well at all. The audience did not respond to his jokes, and instead of laughter, he was met with silence and discomfort. For someone who dreamed of making people laugh, this moment was painful and confusing. It made him question whether he truly had what it takes to become a comedian. Many people would have stopped at that point, choosing a safer and more stable path in life. But Jim Carrey was different. Instead of giving up, he stepped back, took time to improve himself, and returned with a stronger sense of purpose. This moment of failure became an important turning point in his journey. When he came back to the stage, he was no longer trying to fit into what others expected. Instead, he began to explore his own unique style, one that focused on physical comedy, exaggerated expressions, and bold energy. Slowly, people started to notice him. His performances became more confident, more creative, and more memorable. However, success did not come overnight. He continued to face difficult shows, failed auditions, and moments where it seemed like nothing was working. The entertainment world can be very tough, especially for someone trying to stand out in a crowded field. Still, he kept going. His determination became one of his greatest strengths. Over time, he started performing in comedy clubs, building his skills and learning how to connect with audiences. Each performance taught him something new, helping him grow both as a comedian and as a person. Eventually, his hard work began to pay off, and he started getting more attention from people in the industry. This led to small opportunities, which slowly opened the door to bigger ones. The real breakthrough came in the 1990s, a decade that completely changed his life. During this time, Jim Carrey became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Films like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber turned him into a global sensation almost overnight. Audiences were amazed by his style of comedy, which felt fresh, wild, and full of life. He was not just telling jokes. He was performing with his entire body, creating characters that felt larger than life. His success during this period was extraordinary, and he quickly became one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. However, what made his journey even more interesting was his decision to take risks. Instead of staying in the same type of role, he chose to explore deeper and more serious characters. This was not an easy move, especially for someone known mainly for comedy. But he wanted to prove that he could do more. Films like The Truman Show and Man on the Moon showed a completely different side of him. In these roles, he demonstrated emotional depth and strong acting skills, surprising both audiences and critics. These performances proved that he was not just a funny man, but a talented actor capable of handling complex stories. While his career was reaching new heights, the pressure around him was also growing. Fame can bring many opportunities, but it also comes with expectations and constant attention. People began to watch his every move, both on and off the screen. This kind of pressure can be difficult for anyone, and it started to affect different parts of his life. As his public image continued to grow, his personal life became more complicated. The same energy that made him successful on stage sometimes made it harder to find balance in his private life. This contrast between success and struggle is something many people do not see when they look at celebrities. They see the fame, the money, and the success, but they do not always see the challenges that come with it. Jim Carrey's story during this time reminds us that success is not always as simple as it looks from the outside. Behind the laughter and the bright lights, there are often deeper stories waiting to be understood. As the career of Jim Carrey continued to grow, so did the pressure that came with his success. From the outside, his life looked almost perfect. He was famous, respected, and loved by millions of fans around the world. His films were successful, his name was everywhere, and he had reached a level of fame that very few people ever achieve. But behind this powerful image, his personal life was becoming more complicated and, at times, very difficult. One of the biggest challenges he faced was maintaining stable relationships. While his career demanded constant attention, travel, and energy, his personal life needed time, balance, and emotional presence. These two things did not always work well together. His early marriage came to an end during a time when his career was just starting to rise, which made the situation even more emotional and stressful. Later, he became romantically involved with Lauren Holly, his co-star from Dumb and Dumber. At first, their relationship seemed strong and full of promise, but like many relationships in the public eye, it faced intense pressure. Being constantly watched by the media and the public can make even simple moments feel heavy and difficult. Over time, their relationship also came to an end, adding to a growing pattern in his personal life. This pattern was not just about relationships failing, but about the deeper struggle of finding stability while living under constant attention. For someone who brought so much joy to others, it became clear that his own emotional world was not always peaceful. There were also moments of deep sadness that affected him in ways the public could not fully see. One of the most painful events in his life brought his private struggles into public discussion, reminding everyone that behind the fame, he was still a human being dealing with real emotions. These experiences created a strong contrast between how people saw him and what he was actually going through. On screen, he was full of life, energy, and humor. Off-screen, he was facing questions about identity, purpose, and emotional balance. This contrast is something that many celebrities experience, but it is rarely understood by the public. As time passed, Jim Carrey began to change in ways that some people found surprising. His views on life, success, and even fame itself started to shift. He spoke more openly about deeper topics, including the meaning of life and the idea that the image people see is not always real. For some fans, this made him even more interesting and thoughtful. For others, it created confusion, as it did not match the funny and energetic person they were used to seeing. This growing difference between his public image and his real personality is an important part of his story. It shows that people are not fixed or simple. They grow, they change, and they go through different phases in life. Around this time, stories began to surface about how he behaved in certain situations, especially during intense creative work. One of the most talked about examples came from his experience while working on the film Man on the Moon, where he played the role of comedian Andy Kaufman. During this project, he became deeply involved in the character, sometimes staying in role even when the cameras were not rolling. This level of commitment showed his dedication, but it also raised questions about how far an actor should go to become a character. Some people admired this approach, seeing it as a sign of true artistic passion. Others found it difficult to understand, feeling that it created tension and confusion on set. This moment became a clear example of how his personality and creative process were not always easy for others to interpret. It also helped build the idea that there was more to him than what people saw in his comedy films. This is where the story begins to connect more closely with the experience of Dave Chappelle. As someone who also understands the world of comedy and fame, Chappelle had his own expectations before meeting Jim Carrey. Like many others, he admired his work and saw him as a powerful figure in entertainment. But when their paths finally crossed, the experience was not as simple as he had imagined. What he observed was not just a famous comedian, but a person with layers, complexity, and a presence that felt different from the public image. This moment would later become an important part of how people viewed both men, not because it was shocking in a dramatic way, but because it revealed something honest and real about the nature of fame and identity. When Dave Chappelle finally had the chance to meet Jim Carrey, it was not just a simple meeting between two comedians. It was a moment shaped by expectations, admiration, and curiosity. Like many people, Chappelle had spent years watching Jim Carrey on screen, seeing his wild energy, his confidence, and his ability to completely take control of any scene. From the outside, Carrey appeared larger than life, almost like someone who was always performing, always on, and always in control of his craft. This created a strong image in Chappelle's mind, an idea of who Jim Carrey was as a person. But as often happens in life, the reality of meeting someone can feel very different from the version we build in our imagination. When Chappelle observed Carrey in real life, he noticed something that surprised him. It was not about Carrey being rude or unfriendly, but about the way he carried himself and how deeply he seemed connected to his own persona. There was a sense that the line between the character and the real person was not always clear. For someone like Chappelle, who values authenticity and directness, this created a moment of reflection. It made him think about what it truly means to be a performer and how much of a person's identity can be shaped by the roles they play. This experience was not loud or dramatic, but it was meaningful. It stayed with him and later became something he spoke about in a thoughtful way. What made his words interesting was not that he was criticizing Jim Carrey, but that he was sharing an honest observation. He described the feeling of meeting someone he once admired and realizing that they were more complex than expected. This idea connects to a larger truth that many people can relate to. We often build strong images of celebrities in our minds, seeing them only through their work, interviews, or public appearances. But those images are only one part of who they are. In reality, every person has layers that are not always visible. In the case of Jim Carrey, his deep involvement in his craft, especially his ability to fully become a character, may have influenced how he interacted with the world around him. This is not necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it can be seen as a sign of dedication and passion. However, it can also create moments where others feel unsure about what is real and what is part of the performance. For Chappelle, this experience highlighted the difference between watching someone from a distance and meeting them face to face. It showed that fame can sometimes create a kind of barrier, where the person behind the image becomes harder to understand. This moment also reflects something important about the entertainment industry as a whole. Performers are often expected to give their best at all times, to be entertaining, interesting, and memorable. Over time, this expectation can shape how they behave, even outside of their work. The line between performance and reality can become blurred, especially for someone who has spent years building a powerful and unique style. Jim Carrey's career is a perfect example of this. His comedy is not quiet or simple. It is bold, expressive, and full of movement. It requires a level of energy and focus that can be difficult to turn off. For someone like Chapelle, who has his own strong voice and style, seeing this from a close perspective created a moment of understanding as well as surprise. It was not about judging Carrey, but about recognizing that the person he admired was not exactly the same as the image he had created in his mind. This realization is something many people experience in different parts of life. Whether it is meeting a public figure, a mentor, or even someone they look up to, the reality can sometimes feel unexpected. In this case, the experience became part of a larger conversation about